Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you listening on the Life Online Radio Network, we welcome you in. For those of you listening on YouTube, we welcome you in. Special shout out to our sponsors, Affinity Writing and Editing Services. That's at Affinity WES. On Twitter or on Facebook at Affinity WES. If you do anything with writing for a project, they'll be able to help you, and at a reasonable rate. Oh, it's the most wonderful time of the year coming up, isn't it? And we have the most wonderful events happening to celebrate that time of year. The end of 2021 is not particularly special. We've gone through a lot during this year, but we've gone through a lot in previous years too. I encourage you to check out other end of the year videos from YouTube, although this is not a true end of the year video. And just by going about, you'll find almost whatever year you pick. Oh, 2013 was a lousy year. Let's hope 2014 was better. And then their next end of the year video will say, well, 2014 was a bad year. Let's hope 2015 is better. Not once during the past couple of years do you hear somebody say, 2000 whatever was great. Let's hope 2000 whatever is better. And that's because in our minds, we're always kind of comparing things to the past. We remember being kids. We remember that special day when we got married, we graduated, we got our dream job, whatever it might be, and we want to return to that time. We want to go back to the past. It's called a return to the golden age because things were always better in the past in our memories. Things were more familiar because as we go forward as a species, things change. So what we dealt with in the past is more familiar. We have a president in the United States who bases most of his election campaign solely on hearkening back to the Ronald Reagan years. Now, I'll admit, I, along with probably a large amount of my listeners, grew up when Ronald Reagan was in charge. And it seemed people were more prosperous back then. The economy has changed since then. The lifestyle has changed since then. It's almost unrecognizable what we used to do. As a parent, I sometimes have to explain to my children the difference in what we had to do. I had to explain what a Sears Catalog was. For those of you who remember it, and those of you that don't, the Sears Catalog used to arrive roughly around this time of year, and it would be stuffed full of toys. And you would circle every single toy that you wanted. Now, depending on your parents' situation, or even if you had parents, you might not get everything you circled, but for a couple of weeks, that little catalog let you dream. Quite unlike the modern day, where if you want to look at toys, you go on Google. It doesn't have quite the same magic to it. It's far more efficient, and arguably you can have more dreams today than you used to, but all of humanity kind of has this obsession with returning to a golden age. Most of the leaders have appealed to this, saying they're going to take us back to traditional values. They're going to bring us back to the way things used to be when we were more prosperous, when we were more God-fearing, let's say, because there's almost always a religious message underneath. The only leader I can think of that didn't directly do that was Barack Obama, because he wanted hope and change. Everybody else has always said, well, we're going to take things back to the way they used to be. If you look at most entertainment, that's what they want to do. Movies keep coming out saying, we're going to take this back to the original script. How many times has Dune been remade because they keep trying to get it closer to the original books? And I think Frank Herbert was a decent author, and it's a movie that does deserve a great treatment. Battlestar Galactica. How many people, we're on our third reboot of Battlestar Galactica coming out. Because people keep wanting to go back and say, this old entertainment, here's a fresh coat of paint. Here it is anew. And it's not just entertainment that people do this. It plays a huge role in politics. I can't emphasize this enough. For one reason, most of the people sitting in senior political positions are seniors themselves. Look at a Supreme Court, look at any House committee, and they're stuffed to the gills with older people. You rarely see a group of 30-something politicians being elected to these places. And the older politicians, which is natural for human evolution, I don't want to say anything, they have that sense of nostalgia. Where back in the 80s, when they were making their money and they were doing all the crazy stuff that went along with the 80s, they want to take us back to that. Well, we're never going to get back there. The world has changed, the people have changed, everything has changed. If the 90s were your time, Kurt Cobain isn't coming back. But this idea of a return to the golden age permeates Western culture. And that's partly because of the leadership. Now for this, I have to take you back, not to a golden age, to a very, very, very dark age. That's the 1700s, 18th century. In 1776, as is hammered into everybody's head, the United States had their massive revolution. And the entire point behind their revolution was to get rid of the monarchy and establish their own colony. Now, there's a lot of independent, complex narratives here that do deserve a fine microscopic view so that we can tear them apart. But for now, I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to look at let's look at this from a bird's eye view, because otherwise I could be talking for hours and you guys will have hit the thumbs down button and taken off. So let's zip shot this. After a whole bunch of series of events, the United States declares independence and the founding fathers get together. They're looking around to see what they can model their government afterwards. They know they don't want a monarchy. As a matter of fact, it was recorded that George Washington was offered the opportunity to be king, and he turned it down. This was not only him trying to stand true to his principles of being a Democrat, which he wasn't, and being a politically forward person, which he wasn't, but it was more to do with the fact he was trying to emulate the ancient Romans. Now, the ancient Romans, in the beginning, were what were called a republic, the SPQR, the Republic of Rome. Not everybody in Rome had the right to vote. Well, that's partly debatable. In the tribes, they could vote. The tribes would elect their leader would go on to vote and put the people into the Senate. A little more complicated, but you wouldn't get to vote the person in, which in fact is what the United States wound up doing. For everybody who just participated in the election, and thank you for participating, whatever the result might be, getting out to vote is a good thing, because at least you can say you did what you could. You don't have to vote, but you can at least say that you did. But the Senate in ancient Roman times was kind of an old boys club. There certainly weren't any women in it. Not that there's anything wrong with women in the modern age, but that's just one way that when you say we're going to take people back to a golden age, it's never really quite as golden as people remember. The Roman Senate was actually very effective. They fought many wars, they managed to administer their economy, and they pushed the Roman boundaries from being a single city out to a world-spanning empire. We know what Roman architecture looks like, and it is quite breathtaking with tall columns, marble everywhere. It just evokes luxury. Augustus once boasted that he found a city made of iron and he turned it into marble. And that indeed was an accomplishment for the ancient world. It was a huge expense to go around and buy that much marble and employ that many stonemasons to make Rome the beautiful city that it is today. We find the United States apes this tradition, quite literally copies it line for line. First thing, look at the White House. What do you have? You have a dome, you have columns, all painted beautiful white as if it was made of marble. And that's because they were purposely trying to evoke a Roman tradition. Look at the other nations that have split off from the United Kingdom over the past couple hundred years. Most of them have a very Gothic architecture to their places of power. The Canadian Parliament is very Gothic looking. The Australian Parliament was originally quasi-classical, had some classical elements in it, but when they redesigned it, they took it to a more modern Gothic approach. And the same holds true for all the nations that walked away from the United Kingdom, or were allowed to walk away. The single exceptions I can think of being India and Pakistan, because they had their own architectural style and millennia of tradition backing them up. But the United States was the first to really walk away. And they walked away with the idea that they were going to be a Roman-style republic. Now, a republic is not democracy. If anything, it's an oligarchy, because in ancient Rome, the same families would put their people into the Senate over and over again. One of the signs that you had done something for yourself, you had made yourself a man, was to go through the ranks and eventually become a senator. And you could do this mostly by the same way that we do it today. You network, you kibitz, you get in there, you shake some hands, press the flesh, and make sure that you do favors for people, and in public you make sure everybody's having a good time. Let's see, I'm trying to think of a president that did that recently. Oh yes, number 65, who would hold his big rallies, sell his shirts. Everybody had a great time. And he has enough money that he can influence the people in quite the same way they did in ancient times. He doesn't need to bribe you, because in ancient times they would bribe you. People would often vote based on the money that they got. The modern age, you're not allowed to do that. Well, you're not allowed to do that in the same way. I can host a rally, I can give away free hot dogs, free pop, whatever it might be, and you think, hey, this guy's pretty good, I'm going to vote for him. It's not really bribery, but at the same token, is it any better? Now, the irony to this being, the Romans did the same thing. When the Romans had kicked out their king, which you notice that rhymes with the United States kicking out their king, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The Romans kicked their kings off before they became a republic. But they were trying to go back to when Saturn ruled. You see, in the ancient Roman pantheon, Zeus was the current ruler. But it was believed Saturn came before him. Saturn was Zeus's father, and during the time of Saturn, supposedly, the people had a very easy time. The crops sprung up by themselves. The wine virtually poured itself in your glass. And it was the golden age to the Romans. So we see the United States is a copy of what they thought the Romans were doing, while the Romans were copying what they thought was happening in their golden age of Saturn. So you have an echo of an echo. You also have the United States copying the Roman Empire, trying to be the world police. If there's trouble in the world, you can't shake a stick without the United States being there. The United States just redeployed its B-52s back to the Middle East. Why, you might ask? Because they're the world police. The United States has also started to do deals with the Taliban. Yes, that Taliban. The one that we invaded Afghanistan to kick out because those were evil people. Well, now they are, and I quote directly here, moderate Taliban. End quote. The United States spent millions, if not billions of dollars bombing Afghanistan, invading, going after the Taliban, saying that they were the evil that brought us Osama bin Laden and all these other people. And here we are, 19 years later, saying, oh, there's some of them that are moderates. Really? This might initially sound like a contradiction in terms. And it is. But it's very, very, very much in the realm of political realpolitik. Realpolitik being a German term, which means you do what you have to in politics to survive. Rome was also good at doing deals with people who were borderline enemies. The Germans always gave Romans trouble. Going back as far as you can tell, the Germans would be able to beat back the Roman hordes. Even in the time of Augustus, the supposed greatest emperor, he lost legions to German ambushes. And it took 20, 30 years for them to decide to send troops in again. So Rome would work around that by trying to bribe them. We can't conquer you militarily, but hey, let's give you some money. Julius Caesar actually used German cavalry to win his wars in Gaul. He paid them, they sat around most of the time and did nothing, at least according to Suetonius, but when he needed them, they were there, and they were there for the money. Now in the modern day, we hire very few mercenaries. There still are mercenary groups out there, like the Gurkhas, for example, but that's how those people make a living. And by recruiting the Taliban through money, the United States has once again emulated Rome. We're having trouble controlling an area, so let's bribe them instead. Because money is infinite right now. Rome thought they had infinite money too. Part of that is because they were very effective money managers. They had the concept of an audit. They would send somebody out, and while you were the governor of a province or whatever you might be, they'd go over your books and make sure all the money was coming to Rome, whether to the Senate or to the emperor that it was supposed to. The United States loves auditing things. The IRS is notorious for going out and going after people. Pretty much every president I can think of has come in, and while they've had a smooth transition, they always kick some people out and accuse them of irregularities. It's part of the game, the realpolitik game. And there's nothing wrong with it. You want to put your people in place because you want things to run smoothly. When the Roman consuls came in, there were two Roman consuls, and they were kind of co-presidents. It's not really an exact analogy, but that's the way things were in Rome for a very long time. And the way they would rule is if something came to them, if they both agreed on it, it would be passed. Kind of like the president does right now, it's just one person has that authority. But the Romans were afraid of monarchs. They had suffered so much over Tarquinius that they didn't want to have one person in charge again. So they had two people. This was good in some ways because if two people got elected that worked together, they would do very well. A lot of times, though, it turned out one was dominant and one was submissive. And so the dominant one was the one who ruled, and the other one just kind of went along for the ride. And that was a risk when you put those people into place. The same as the risk when you put one person into the White House. So far, they have all run their term, they've all stepped down, they've all done everything the way that they're supposed to. But the fact is, democracy doesn't last forever. The age of Saturn, the god, came to an end. According to legend, the god was told that one of his children would kill him. And so, when his children were born, his wife presented them to him, which was a common custom. In ancient times, when you had a child, your wife, because the significant other role and stuff like that wasn't really the same as it is today, your wife, your official chosen wife, would present it to you before you and put it on the ground. And if you picked that child up, you were acknowledging it was your child and it had all your protections. If you rejected it, then the child would be exposed, which is a nice way of saying it would be left out in the wilderness. Saturn took it a step further, according to legend. Saturn decided to eat his children. Yes, this supposedly glorious god who was giving humanity all these great benefits about not having to work, not having to do anything, was eating his own children. Now his wife, Rhea, eventually decided to give him a stone. She wrapped a big stone, gave it to him, and he ate it. The child's name was Zeus. Now, depending on the narrative, either Zeus went away, came back as an adult and slew him, or the stone made Saturn throw up his other children, and the Olympians then came together to fight against their own father. Whatever the case was, Saturn's world was overthrown by his son. And that was one of the golden ages. In Rome, they were so afraid of monarchs that they allowed Julius Caesar to invade their own people just because they were afraid of having a monarch. And Julius Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, became Augustus, the first Roman emperor. Now, what you might be saying is the relevance to this series of revolutions. Well, so happens that this, the most wonderful time of year, when Christmas carols are going to be out, when you see the lights decorating people's houses, hasn't just existed since the birth of Jesus. The public sacrifices and banquets for the god of Saturn were between the 17th and the 23rd of December. And this was a very topsy-turvy time. Just as it is right now, with the court challenges going, with everything happening, it's all topsy-turvy because we're in the middle of Saturnalia. And the old ways never die, because people always want to go back to that golden age where those holidays, those festivals had meaning. Saturnalia had some very peculiar meanings. There was gift giving, something like what we do today, except the gift would either be a little statuette or something of humorous value. There was gambling. Well, there's something that never has gone away, has it? People love to gamble, and they'll take any excuse to do it. Gambling was technically illegal in Rome at various times, but just like the modern day, gamblers will always find a way around the law. Quite curiously, in Saturnalia, there was this sense of equality, where everybody was the same. Slaves, yes, the people that we picture hunched over in fields and gathering wheat. Well, ancient Roman slaves, some of them were sent to the mines in the fields, and others lived with their masters and performed valuable functions. And at this time of the year, the masters of the house, and I say the term masters on purpose because 99.9% of them were men. It was very rare to have a woman running anything in ancient times. It did happen, but it was very rare. But the masters of the house would go out and their servants could speak to them any way they wanted. Their servants and their slaves. Now, as a slave, you can imagine if you have any sense of decorum, you're going to say nothing but nice things to your master. If you're in the mines and you can't get any worse, you might have some more unpleasant things to say about your master because you already wound up in the pit once, you can't get any worse. In a weird way, we copy this in the modern world. Not quite to the same extent of owning slaves, as such thing is deplorable in my opinion, and nobody should ever be a slave to anybody else. But we do the same thing. This is supposed to be the time where everybody is equal and everybody speaks nicely of each other. We're supposed to be holding hands like that old Coke commercial on the side of the hill where all those crowds sing that they'd like to give the world a Coke. This is the Western fairy tale image. And for the Romans and for the United States, it's all still the fairy tale ideal. But we cling to fairy tales. We need these ancient ideas so that we can run our modern society off of it. No matter whether you're an atheist, whether you're a Buddhist, whether you're Muslim, whatever you might be, you recognize Christmas is a good time to be in a Western society. Things go on sale. People run about, and mostly they're a little more cheerful. This year I have no predictions on that, with various people being locked down, etc. So we do try to maintain this idea of equality during this time of year. Another thing that was important during this time, for Saturn's time, for the Roman times, and now, is a banquet. And what would Christmas be without a banquet? Christmas, Saturnalia, whatever you might call it, still the same holiday. Now, why do we have a banquet? To celebrate. Festivals are inherently tied with food. There's very few festivals out there that have nothing to do with food. And I say that in full awareness that Ramadan exists and Yom Kippur exists, where supposedly, well, not supposedly, you're not supposed to be eating food during those times. But that's the thing, the festival is still about food, the lack of food. It's all coded in, but we celebrate with food. Humans naturally, when they want to celebrate, think of plenty at their table. Think of Thanksgiving. The idea is celebrating how much you harvested this year. Think of Easter. The idea is to celebrate with what you have this year. And that's the basis of all of our festivals, is food. Because if people have full bellies, they're not going to be asking too many questions. They're not going to be bothering the powers that be. Bread and circuses wasn't pioneered by the Romans, but they used it well, and we're still doing it today. That's partly one of the crimes that we have to live up to in a capitalist society. We're not a capitalist society, a pseudo-capitalist society. We don't have enough food to go around, despite the fact that we have untold acres of wheat being mowed under this year. We still don't have enough food to feed our own people. And that is criminal. But so long as you can still have a turkey at Christmas and at Thanksgiving, that's the main thing. That's what counts. A chicken in every pot, as they like to say. We get that as well from the Romans. The Romans used to have a public dispensary of grain, where the poor and the people that didn't have enough money could come and get enough grain to live for a week or whatever the portion was, and emperors would often reward their people by giving them more grain. We see this in the modern day by people offering more public services. It's not quite giving you a handout. There's food banks for that, but you can still get money for a lot of things. You can get money for pretty much anything you want if you're willing to go through the government bureaucracy. Think of any crazy thing you possibly can, and somebody will give you some money for it. Might not be enough to live your life off of, but you can still get some money for building rockets, for example. There's a billionaire out there right now who's done very well off of doing just that. Back to Saturn, though, and its relevance to the modern United States and us. So by appealing to this golden age constantly, we have to look at where these golden ages come from and where they end. Rome ended when Julius Caesar effectively got rid of the other two most powerful people in Rome and sat upon the throne. He was the consul. He did have a second consul, but it would be like standing next to Hulk Hogan in a wrestling ring. No one's going to pay attention to you. They're going to pay attention to Hulk Hogan. And Julius Caesar was the rock star of his day. He didn't officially abolish the Senate, but the same token, he made sure they were all quite well bribed, which he could afford from his wars. He also made sure that Crassus, who was his partner, had already passed away. Crassus led an unfortunate military campaign that was disastrous for Rome. And Pompey, his former friend and son-in-law, although Pompey was older than him, he had chased Pompey out of Rome, and basically they did battle, and that's how Julius Caesar became the first ruler of Rome. He never said that he was king because he was aware that when you say you're a king or a monarch or anything like that, the Roman people were still at the stage of mind where they were not ready to accept that. His adopted son, Octavian, who is later known as Augustus, chased Mark Antony around so that he could establish Rome for himself. And he did accept the title of Imperator, Emperor, as we call it today. Now, why is it that Augustus was able to raise his own flag as an imperator while his adopted father was not? Simple. So much chaos had happened between the time when Julius Caesar was having his wars and Augustus was finishing up his wars that people were willing to take any excuse for law and order. While Julius Caesar sold himself as a temporary dictator, Augustus had no such pretensions. He just needed to figure out a way that the people would accept his rule. And imperator was more acceptable than king. So once again, just by changing the words, people will go along with what you say. I bring along this idea of revolutions for a very particular purpose. The current president, who's on his way out, has raised a lot of fuss saying he thinks the election was unjust. He thinks that he hasn't been defeated and he's mounting all the challenges that he can. One might look at this as a man throwing a temper tantrum. But the people who established the United States were no fools. They knew their classical history. Anybody who studied has run across Latin history at one point or another. And this might be one of the threads that Donald Trump is trying right now. And whether you support him or you don't, whether you love him or you hate him, this is really smart of him. By saying he was never properly defeated, he was never justly taken out of office, he can bang that point into people's heads from now until the day he passes on, which, again, I'm not a fan of anybody in particular, but I don't wish any harm on anybody, and I hope he has a long, healthy life. Just as I hope every one of you has a long, healthy life. But because he can establish this false narrative that he was unjustly kicked out, he can bang that drum for a couple of years. Now, Donald Trump has taken two families as who he wants to emulate, Ronald Reagan and the Kennedys. It's no secret that he put his family everywhere in the White House that he could. Just as there were so many Kennedys in so many positions of power, until their tragic undoing, they were pretty much set everywhere they went. And the Kennedys always had that regal attitude to them. Donald Trump thinks he has that same ability within him. And he has so many family members, from his daughters to his sons. Ivanka would love a chance at leadership. Who knows, down the line, some of his younger children might consider it, and they will be able to play off that narrative and tell the people their father was unjustly run out of town. That's a powerful thing to play with. The idea of the son or the daughter coming back to avenge lost wrongs from the past, it's a very powerful narrative. Lots of stories have been written over that, where the son avenges the father. It's actually a bedrock of modern movie making. And because of that, I'm watching the next couple of years with very, very intense interest. Donald Trump is getting a little long in the tooth. Well, he was long in the tooth before he got into office. But he always had the long game in his plan. He wants power. Anybody who forms a conspiracy wants power sooner rather than later. No one really establishes a conspiracy long-term goals without the idea of putting themselves at the head of it. This is why, although I mentioned the Illuminati, I try not to mention them by name, because A, because it's very complicated, and B, because they're not sitting around and waiting. Other people would have you believe there's this cabal out there just waiting to take power. And they're not waiting. They could take it any time, but their power is where they want it to be. They don't want to be out in front of the cameras, whereas somebody like Donald Trump does want to be in front of the cameras. Most business people don't want that. They want to be in private, negotiating their deals, and working things the way they want them to work. So, there's a potential future here where one of Donald Trump's family comes up, rising on the narrative of who his father is. They'll have a decent amount of charisma. Let's put it that way. Not all of them would be interesting to listen to speak. I don't like what they have to say, but at the same token, I admit there is appeal in the way that they present themselves. And being Saturnalia, this is when we used to appoint a Lord of Misrule. Somebody to go around and be the maitre d', if you will have it, the person who rules over the festivities. The festivities that are supposed to be chaotic, where there's banquets, there's celebrating, there's crazy things going on. And that's the way people treat Christmas and New Year's. Christmas is a little more elegant and seen as family, whereas New Year's, it's a little bit more of a bit of drunken debauchery. We're going to go out, we're going to have a wild time, damn the horses, full speed ahead, arm the torpedoes, whatever we're going to do. That's the way New Year's is. Now, Saturnalia ended at the 23rd of December. And what month comes after December? January. In honor of the god Janus. Janus was the two-headed god, the guardian of portals. Now, portals meaning doors, anything that transitions you from one state to another. You go from outside to inside, whatever it might be. And Janus was also the god of war, or at least one of the gods of war. There was a temple built to Janus. And when the doors were open, it showed the Roman people were at war. When the temple doors were closed, the Roman people were at peace. Augustus was one of the greatest emperors because he was able to close the doors to the temple of Janus twice. So twice during his long reign, I think about 76, so let's call it 60 years, he managed to have the entire empire at peace. Imagine if the United States had a similar tradition. It's the one thing they didn't copy out of the ritual, but the fact is they couldn't have closed the doors very often since the 1940s. Matter of fact, I can't really think of a time that they weren't at war in one way or another. But January coming up, we have the New Year, where Janus takes over. The New Year, the portal to new ideas. Again, the transitions over the past couple of years haven't been very good, but that's all a matter of perspective. Janus is also the god of new opportunities. But let's take it to our modern context, New Year's. We all wish each other Happy New Year, and this is a horrible reification. New Year doesn't really make any difference from the old. You're going to go back to going to work, you're going to go back to going to school, or you're going to be back to whatever you were doing before the year began. The only thing is you've changed the calendar. It's a good excuse for a little bit of a blow-off and celebration. Maybe we don't do sacrifices anymore. But the point is, the church took these festivals straight from Rome and made sure that they were perpetuated to the modern day. Now, why did the church do this? The answer is simple. Pragmatism. The French, when they had their revolution, just about 10-15 years after the American had theirs, the French went through and completely redid the calendar. They came up with new dates, new times, new months, everything they renamed, they redid it. So the 1st of Thermidor, I think, was the 1st of March. I could be wrong on that, but it shows you the French decided to do a complete break with tradition. There was no golden age they were looking back to. They went to a new age. Now, eventually they wound up having to adopt the same calendar as everybody else because it's horrible trying to negotiate a trade with two different currencies, 2 different dates, 2 different times. I've been there. It is not an easy thing to do. But they held on to that calendar for a long time. The United States didn't change the calendar. They didn't change anything. They just changed the people that were in charge. Because nothing else needed to be changed. And as a matter of fact, they never even changed their monarch. There's an obscure treaty that was signed from King George. Oh, there's so many Georges, don't ask me to name the specific one. For the lease for the land for Massachusetts for the whole New England area. And it was agreed that he would be paid, I think it would be 20 pounds of silver or gold. You can Google this. Just Google, is the United States still a crown colony? And the fact is, from 1776 to 2020, the United States has never missed that payment. We've had some pretty impressive figures with impressive historical knowledge. And Donald Trump actually comes from New York, not very far from where this area is. I imagine at some point it's been brought up to him that treaty exists. And if not, I'm sure all the other presidents have been told about it at some point, if they didn't live in an area. And since most presidential candidates are lawyers, somebody would have had to hear about it. Yet they still keep that treaty in place. They still pay that 20 pounds of silver or gold. I forget what it is exactly. Why is that? Because the United States, like any other child, is still clinging on to their parents. The United States and the United Kingdom have fought wars. They've fought each other over all sorts of stuff. But at the same token, they still recognize the British are where they come from. They know the Puritans were fleeing British rule. They know their entire culture is still based on British ideas. And that's why they're not quite willing to cut that tie. Just like when you move out for the first time, you still call your parents, "Hey mom, hey dad, I'm okay." Even if you have a horrible relationship with them. There are a few exceptions to that, but the United States still wants to cling on to the idea that they're evolved British people who have reestablished the Roman Empire. And they're going to be the Roman Empire, come hell or high water. The Roman Empire is exactly what they want to be. And that's shown by the way that they've been becoming more aggressive everywhere lately. China and Russia have been equally as aggressive, don't get me wrong. But the United States is... they're flying drones everywhere. Stealth drones, regular drones, hoping that they're not going to be noticed. They are deploying their troops and bombers and all sorts of things all over the place. I ask you, what does this sound like? And it sounds like Star Wars, the Empire. The Empire was the one with all the cool technological gadgets with Death Stars and, really fast, really big battleships. The United States has all that technology. And when we go into an Iraq, an Afghanistan, a Vietnam, whatever it is, when the United States shows up with this arsenal of androids and fighters and all these crazy things, armored soldiers are going to be out there very soon. Because they're working on that technology right now, and generally what they tell us they're working on, they already have. So from those people's perspective, it's like being part of the Rebel Alliance. They need their Jedi, they need their C-3POs, they need their Princess Leia to guide them and to save them from these United States Imperials. Said it before, I'll say it again. Some poor farmer in Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, whatever it is, if he gets on the wrong side of the United States and they drop a bomb and it blows his leg off, what is he going to tell his children? Is he going to say the world was in a very complicated place, there were two sides fighting, it was difficult to know who was who, and because of that I got caught in the crossfire? No, he's going to say those damn Americans blew my legs off. And he's not wrong to feel that way. I mean, with the pain he would have gone through and everything else, of course you'd lash out at the first person possible. And this is the public image the United States has right now. It's the same public image that ancient Rome had. It's the same public image that people have fought against since the beginning of time. When you're an invader, it's very difficult to get sympathy from locals because they were already happy with the system that they had. Otherwise, they would have thrown it over themselves. And despite the fact that you might not like the government that you have, the fact is you can go to your local government and meet them, greet them, whatever it is, try to convince them to your way. But a soldier, you can't do anything with a soldier. Soldier is told to stand there, guard this point, not let anybody go past. That soldier is going to execute that duty to the best of his ability. Doesn't matter how just you are or how right you are, that is his duty, his sworn duty. When you enter the forces, you swear an oath. And by God, you are bound by that oath. So, for the local fella who doesn't want American tanks going through his backyard, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but that's for us here in the Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic world. We don't have that because they treat us differently. They need us on their side. Whereas when they go into the Middle East, they don't need anybody on their side. They've got to the point now where the generals have become so arrogant that they can drop a bomb on a person's exact whereabouts and they can hit him and nobody else. Can you imagine this capability? Anybody in the world, name it, you can take them out, with maybe a few exceptions. I imagine Vladimir Putin has some sort of defense mechanism against it. I don't know how advanced it is, but I'm sure he can put up some sort of electric shield and make sure that he can't be detected. The Chinese, no doubt, are not far behind, and hazard a guess, I'd say most nations have some sort of similar system in place. But that gets into the black world. I don't want to get into that. I want to get back to the whole idea of things being copied and carried forward. So from the rule of Saturn in mythological times to Rome to the present day, we're all celebrating the same holiday, the holiday of Saturnalia, celebrating the god Saturn, who ate his children. But remember, his children came back not only to haunt him, but to dominate our lives. Zeus, the leader of the Roman pantheon, or Jupiter, Zeus is the Greek, Jupiter is Roman, that's embarrassing for me, but Jupiter, well, Jupiter's up in the sky. Saturn's up in the sky. We hear about them constantly in the media. And we're still finding new things out about them. Every couple of years they send a new probe to Jupiter or Saturn because we're paying homage to the gods. They're not lost gods, despite the fact we wrap things up in a Christian veneer. And indeed, I love Christianity. I'm not a Christian, but at the same token, I love a lot of the things it says. But because the Christianity was the religion of slaves in ancient Rome. Remember, once a year the slaves were allowed to talk to their masters. So if these slaves could cause their masters to see things from their point of view, and we know Christianity has had no shortage of charismatic preachers, they were able to convince the Roman elites that Christianity was compatible with their beliefs. And so Rome went from being pagan to Christian. My question is, we know there are big changes planned for the next couple of years. The next revolution will be an economic revolution. It's coming soon. As a matter of fact, we know it's coming before 2030, and they're going to start implementing it any time. Which Rome are we going to wind up with out of this? The Republican Rome, where there's at least some sort of tribal connection where the local person is still responsible to you? Or Imperial Rome, where the emperor could do pretty much anything he want, provided he kept his guards happy. The new president coming in, Janus's doors are open. He looks both ways. He's trying to see which way Joe Biden is going to steer us for the near future. And again, just as Janus had two faces, one facing each way, Joe Biden has to be able to look at all directions at once. Because there's a big, big problem coming. And we don't know which way it's going to come from. Saying that, depending on when you're listening to this, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and thank you for joining us on the Silverlight Show. It's always our honor to host you. If you have any questions or concerns, you can reach us on Twitter at @SilverlightLive. That's Twitter at @SilverlightLive. You can email at silverlightservices@gmail.com. All those are all lowercase. If you support the show, there'll be a link in the comments that will show you some of our books. And if you buy a couple books, it helps us more than Patreon or anything else ever could. I don't want to use Patreon. I'm not saying I never will, but for now, the books are the best way to support us. Other than that, thank you everybody for listening, and have a great day.